One characteristic that our culture has contempt for is gullibility. No one wants to be perceived as being a gullible person, and we tend to be critical of those who we perceive to be gullible. As a culture, we recognize the importance of having good critical thinking skills, and we encourage students to think for themselves. Schools often stress the importance of questioning sources and verifying information because being easily misled is understandably considered an undesirable trait. In our culture, it's also considered normal for adults to have a healthy amount of skepticism of one's leaders, whether political leaders, faith leaders, or bosses. In the media we consume, characters in films, TV shows, or cartoons who are overly trusting are often portrayed as naive, and someone who falls for an obvious scam is depicted as the butt of the joke. Audiences are critical of characters who are easily fooled. On social media, internet culture is full of memes and viral videos that mock those who believe in hoaxes or misinformation. We also make moral judgments of those who are perceived as gullible, because being gullible is equated with a lack of intelligence or personal responsibility. It isn't unusual for people to blame someone else for being tricked by a scam or false information. How often have you heard phrases that induce shame like, you should have known better, or you really fell for that? Whether you call it being gullible or being deceived, we all know that it's important to have good critical thinking skills when it comes to the area of religion. I suspect that all of us gathered here found ourselves in a congregation like this because not many other faiths are as tolerant of asking critical questions as ours is. I'm sure we can all recall numerous unfortunate examples from American history, particularly recent history, where gullibility and deception played a central role in religious scandals. Who could forget the 1978 scandal involving Jim Jones and the People's Temple, whose followers were convinced to move to a communal settlement in Guyana in hopes of living in a utopia? Instead, it became a site of manipulation, abuse, and eventually mass murder suicide when over 900 people died by drinking poison punch in the tragedy known as the Jonestown Massacre. We still use the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid in our culture to denote someone who has accepted an idea uncritically, often to the person's own detriment. And who can forget in the 1980s when Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and their Praise the Lord Club grew into a media empire, raising millions from viewers through donations. Baker was later found to have misused those funds for personal luxury and to silence allegations of sexual misconduct. Following his 1989 fraud conviction and prison sentence, public awareness of faith-based corruption and the misuse of religious fundraising increased significantly. Because of these and many, many other religious scandals, it's considered mainstream in our society for people to be very critical of both religious beliefs and religious institutions. For some people, they would even consider someone who has any sort of religious beliefs at all to be considered gullible because of how much evidence there is for the opposite point of view. Nearly all religious beliefs are not able to be verified by using the scientific method, and accepting a religious belief without any proof that it's true is considered irrational for many people. Of course, it is important to think critically about religious beliefs and to have a healthy skepticism for religious institutions, which, despite their divine missions, are still run by fallible humans who aren't always as sincere or moral as their ethical code of conduct would make you believe. Having said all that, what is also sometimes true is that despite our best efforts to maintain a coherent, logical, and rational point of view that is consistent with the best information we have about the natural world as we currently understand it, The truth is that sometimes people have personal experiences which challenge their rationality and force them to make room for something more mysterious in their worldview. Today, I'm going to share with you two examples I came across of people who had to do exactly this and how they made sense of their experiences. One anecdote I came across came from an article in Scientific American magazine written by Michael Shermer, who was the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine and who has published several books about skepticism and about debunking pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. In his article, he shared a deeply personal story that challenged his skeptical worldview in the context of an event that occurred just before his wedding to his fiancée, Jennifer, who had recently moved from Germany to the United States to be with him. Jennifer was raised by her mother, and her grandfather, Walter, was the closest thing she had to a father figure in her life, and she was deeply saddened when he died when she was 16 years old. Before she got married, and as she prepared to move from Germany to the US, she mailed some boxes to the States, including some artifacts connected to her grandfather. But the only one which made it intact was her late grandfather's 1978 transistor radio, which held sentimental value despite having long been non-functional. Both Shermer and a professional repair technician attempted to fix the radio, but with no luck, so it just remained silent in a bedroom drawer. On the day of their wedding, Jennifer was feeling the bittersweet absence of her family, particularly her grandfather. While Shermer and Jennifer were alone in the house preparing for their ceremony, they were startled to hear music coming from the bedroom. Investigating the source, they discovered that the sound was emanating from the very same radio that had been completely silent for years. Not only was the radio playing music, it was playing romantic love songs. Jennifer immediately interpreted the event as a sign from her grandfather, saying tearfully to her soon-to-be husband, "My grandfather is here with us. I'm not alone." The radio continued to play music throughout the rest of that day and well into the night, continuing its playlist of romantic love songs, which added a sense of magic and profound connection to an already meaningful occasion. However, the next day, the radio stopped working once again and hadn't made any noise ever since. Despite being a committed skeptic, Shermer admitted that the incident had a powerful effect on him, writing, quote, "Had it happened to someone else, I might suggest a chance electrical anomaly and the law of large numbers as an explanation. With billions of people having billions of experiences every day, there's bound to be a handful of extremely unlikely events that stand out in their timing and meaning. In any case, such anecdotes do not constitute scientific evidence that the dead survive or that they can communicate with us via electronic equipment. Jennifer is as skeptical as I am when it comes to paranormal and supernatural phenomena. Yet, the eerie conjunction of these deeply evocative events gave her the distinct feeling that her grandfather was there and that the music was his gift of approval. I have to admit, it rocked me back on my heels and shook my skepticism to its core as well. I savored the experience more than the explanation. The emotional interpretations of such anomalous events grant them significance regardless of their causal account. And if we are to take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive or the riddle unsolved, we should not shut the doors of perception when they may be open to us to marvel in the mysterious." End quote. Michael Shermer can't explain why what happened to him, and he's not inclined to invoke a God of the gaps argument, but he does have an appreciation for the fact that the event happened, whatever the reason. Similarly, the late American writer and political activist Barbara Ehrenreich, best known for her book Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America, also identified as a skeptic, but had also written about experiences which she'd had that she can't explain, but which she wished she could. Erin Reich was raised as an atheist, and her family had been atheists since the 19th century. According to family lore, one of her 19th century ancestors, an impoverished Irish American woman in Montana, rejected the church with fierce conviction, and as she lay dying in childbirth, she adamantly refused last rites, setting a precedent for generations to come. Ehrenreich felt that she carried forward that tradition by pursuing a career in chemistry and cellular immunology. Following the scientific method, she understood the world as the interaction of tiny particles and predictable mathematical forces. In that worldview, there are no gods, no spirits, only the relentless curiosity of our minds grappling with the vast unknown. Despite this clearly defined worldview, when she was 17 years old, she had a profound experience which she'd been trying to make sense of ever since, and which she wrote about in her book, Living with a Wild God, a non-believer's search for the truth about everything. One morning in 1959, as she stepped out alone onto the streets in the California town where she had gone on a ski vacation with her friends, she noticed that the world around her, including the mountains, the sky, and the modest buildings, they all suddenly ignited with an intense, inexplicable vibrancy. She noted that she saw no visions nor heard any voices. Rather, she simply experienced something akin to an overwhelming blaze, everything, everywhere, all at once. It felt as though something immense poured into her as she poured into it. She is clear that this experience was not some sort of serene union with the all, as described by Eastern mystics. Instead, she described it as a fierce, living force surging through everything, too vast to contain and too achingly beautiful to release. In that moment, it seemed that everything, whether fragile or grand, was destined to be consumed and united in the flame. She felt ecstatic and whole, and yet completely and utterly undone. In the absence of other explanations for her unusual experience, she wondered if she'd had a psychotic break from reality. We know that traditionally, psychiatry has often dismissed those with mystical insights as mentally ill. The ancient shaman could be reinterpreted as the villager with schizophrenia, or Saint Teresa of Avila with her visions could be labeled as a hysteric. The Delphic oracles of ancient Greece could be explained as being under the influence of vaporous intoxicants from under the earth. And perhaps we could say that the Christian mystics have shown signs of temporal lobe epilepsy. A study from Harvard Medical School has even suggested that the revelations of figures like Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Paul could be best explained by psychotic disorders linked to mood or neurological conditions. Having said that, by the time that she was middle-aged, Ehrenreich began to entertain other non-pathological explanations for her experience. While still identifying as an atheist, she wondered if maybe there's another layer of reality or another dimension of consciousness which one day science will know more about. Just as doctors had once thought illness spreads through miasma, which is to say through the air, until they discovered that there were in fact invisible living organisms called germs in the air and on the surfaces which infect people. Reflecting on her mature interpretation of her teenage experience, she wrote, quote, "Without invoking anything supernatural, we may be ready to acknowledge that we are not, after all, alone in the universe. There is no evidence for a god or gods, least of all caring ones, But our mystical experiences give us tantalizing glimpses of other forms of consciousness, which may be beings of some kind, ordinarily invisible to us and to our instruments. Or it could be that the universe itself is pulsing with a kind of life and capable of bursting into something that looks to us momentarily like the flame, end quote. Ehrenreich did not attribute her experience to the supernatural, but she found the image of a flame to be the most fitting way to describe it. The flame evokes powerful imagery from various traditions. The burning bush through which Moses heard the voice of Yahweh, or the tongues of fire said to have descended upon Jesus' apostles, mystically enabling them to speak every language. Flames often appear in mystical and religious contexts, and we Unitarian Universalists are no strangers to this symbol. Each week, as part of our central ritual, we light and extinguish the flaming chalice, a symbol open to many interpretations. One of the most cherished of which is that it represents the light of reason. Few faith traditions emphasize reason as strongly as ours. As Unitarian Universalists, we embrace humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Yet, we also recognize that there is more to our experience than what reason alone can grasp. Shakespeare captured this tension beautifully in Hamlet by writing, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." This balance, reverence for reason, alongside openness to life's mysteries, is one of our unique gifts as a faith tradition. As UUs, we hold space for the mysterious ways that the spirit of life moves among us, while steadfastly avoiding gullibility and embracing the clarity that reason provides.